So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. I know that it's not easy. There's the work responsibilities as well as the home responsibilities, and you all prioritize this. And we have been responsive as a IHE committee and put together what I think is a great agenda over the next day and a half for you. My name is Linda Kranz, and I am the director of the State Personnel Development Grant, also known as the SPDIG, you may have heard. And I also co-coordinate the IHE Hub. One note, as you log in this morning, both your username and password are green, the word green, lowercase, so you can do that. So over the next day and a half, what you'll be receiving from us is some really substantial information on RTI, the imperative for culturally responsive and social justice practices, and a few education initiatives at DPI. The Institute has been designed to support you as you develop curricula for your pre-service students. The State Personnel Development Grant, or SPDIG, is the sponsor, as I said, in collaboration with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. The SPDIG is a grant from the Federal Office of Special Education Programs and focuses on improving educational outcomes for children with disabilities through the use of data-driven, high-quality professional development during pre-service and in-service. The IHE hub of that grant has been operating since December 5th of 2008, when it met for the first time. Back in 2008, DPI had received a grant from the National Center for Special Education Personnel and Related Service Providers, which was focused on providing increased opportunities for urban and rural teaching candidates to access special education-related programs in their local communities. The grant envisioned support through faculty and a faculty leadership group, and thus the IHE Hub was charged with this responsibility. So the following year, DPI assembled about 40 faculty from public and private universities around the state for a forum that was named Developing Faculty Capacity to Prepare All Teachers for All Learners. During the forum, discussions were focused on how to move pre-service education in the direction of helping initial educators meet the needs of students with disabilities, and therefore all students, in their classrooms. Teams, which is how the team tradition of this gathering was born, from various institutes of higher ed, shared both the strengths and the limitations of their teacher prep programs, looking at the various ways that candidates are prepared to meet the needs of all learners, including curricula. They studied the issues facing school districts relative to what's needed from higher education program. The outcome of that forum was a request for professional development for IHE faculty and staff on current initiatives in pre-K-12 education. And this is how the Summer Institute was born in 2010. So this year marks the third IHE Summer Institute of providing faculty and staff the opportunity to gather and examine educational topics that affect pre-service teachers. And I invite you, we've kind of built in with our mini grant showcase tonight, but we've also built in opportunities for you to connect with your colleagues across the state. This is a fabulous turnout. I am just thrilled to pieces to see all of you here today. And so, use the time to network with one another. Before we kick this off, I'd like to recognize some of the folks who've been working really hard to ensure that this next day and a half serve you well. Linda Tuckman, would you stand up, Linda? You know, many of you know Linda. She co-coordinates the IH Hub with me, and she is also the Early Intervention Program Director at the Weissman Center at UW-Madison. Judy Sullivan, who you met at registration, is an Office Operations Associate on the Special Education team at DPI. And for any of you who have ever put on an event such as this one, you know that people like Judy are the backbone, and they keep all those various parts and pieces moving in the same direction. I'd like to also recognize the members of the IHE Advisory Committee. As I said earlier, they set the tone and the direction of the Institute each year. I thank them each for volunteering their time and expertise to this endeavor. Will you please stand up and be recognized? All the members of the IHE. Your contributions are truly appreciated. So in closing, I just want to say that my wish for each of you is that over the next day and a half, you are inspired and informed. May the knowledge that you gain over these days support our children with disabilities through pre-service training. And now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Judy Elliott. Judy Elliott is formerly the Chief Academic Officer of the Los Angeles Unified School District, where she was responsible for curriculum and instruction, early childhood through adult, professional development, innovation, accountability, assessment, after-school programs, state and federal programs, health and human services, the Magnet program, language acquisition for both English and standard English learners, parent outreach, and intervention programs for all students. Prior to that, she was Chief of Teaching and Learning in the Portland, Oregon Public Schools, and prior to that, an Assistant Superintendent of Long Beach Unified School District in California. Judy has been a senior researcher at the National Center on Educational Outcomes at the University of Minnesota, and started her career as a classroom teacher first, and then as a school psychologist. Judy continues to assist districts, national organizations, and state and federal departments of education in their efforts to update and realign curriculum frameworks, instruction, assessment, and accountability that includes all students. Her research interests focus on systems change and reform, effective instruction for all students, and data-based decision-making for accountability and accelerated student achievement. She's trained thousands of staff, teachers, and administrators in the United States and abroad in the areas of integrated service delivery systems, leadership, effective use of data, inclusive schooling that includes linking assessment to classroom intervention, strategies and tactics for effective instruction, curriculum adaptation, collaborative teaching, and behavior management. She's published over 51 articles, book chapters, technical and research reports, and books. She sits on editorial boards for professional journals and is active in many professional organizations. She's nationally known for her work in response to instruction and intervention and has led many successful initiatives and projects around that effort. In her spare time, I mean really, Judy, do you have spare time? She's an avid backpacker and has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in Tasmania. Please join me in welcoming Judy Elliott.
Thank you for that way over the top introduction. How y'all doing? Oh, I don't think so. How y'all doing? How many of you have your grades done? All right, so half of the room is smiling and with me here, and the other half is on, thinking about your grading and your feedback and things. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I was delighted to have the opportunity to come and work with you today. I would just tell you, I don't believe in the expert model. I don't believe one person knows everything there is to know about something. That's my personal belief. But I think the IQ points and the experience in this room, we can figure anything out we want to through the problem-solving process. So what we're going to do today is really, this is your session. It's a luxury as a presenter to have a chunk of time to work with you. So you kind of know what my background is and where I come from, having taught at, I actually grew up in the home of the chicken wing. Anyone? Buffalo, thank you very much. So I grew up in Buffalo, then moved to Minnesota, then went out to California, been out there for about 15 years. So worked at the University of Buffalo, taught colleges in curriculum and instruction, special education, so taught at the undergraduate level for a bunch of years when I was in Buffalo practicing as a school psychologist. So part of the message in the work with you today is to really look at the landscape of teacher ed and leader prep. When I say leader, it's your administrator folks, has changed tremendously because you've got your TPA coming in a year or two. I would tell you some of the stuff that we did in LA when I was there is we actually worked with our local universities to figure out what the value add was to their teacher prep programs based on what program students graduated from. We could actually see how effective those teachers were with our kids in urban education. So there's a lot of pressure from the top down, bottom up. I had an opportunity to be one of the peer reviewers for the feds on the NCLB waivers. Didn't read Wisconsin, but read a bunch of other states, and there's a lot of targets that are put on teachers' backs, and not a lot of emphasis on our administrative folks, our principal folks. And so I always tell the people I work with, if I was a principal, I would be worried, because if your teachers are failing, it's a reflection of your support or lack thereof. And then if I was in higher ed, I'd be going, wow, we need to pay attention to this, because if our folks are not making it in this new teacher evaluation system, how have we or have we not prepared our teachers and our leaders to be successful in the new system? So I tell my friends that, the good news is there's tons of work out there. The bad news is there's tons of work out there. So we have a lot of work to do together. And so I say all of this to say that this is really your session. I'm here to deliver some information with you. I'm excited that I was able to share some of the work of a higher ed blueprint that was done with a group of folks around the multi-tiered system. You have that on your jump drive. There's some amazing article that was written by David Prossi and his crew from Loyola, where they actually took the blueprint that we're going to spend some time with today, and they actually have reformatted and transformed their teacher prep program at Loyola to meet the domains of MTSS that you have. So I'm going to have some times to work with that today. And before we go any further, let me just get a kind of a feel for who's in the room. How many of you are general ed folks? You teach, teacher prep, leader prep, general ed folks. Okay, how many of you are in the special ed world? Okay, any school psychology folk? Okay, how about any deans or administrator dean folk? Okay, how many of you are in administrator leadership programs? Okay, technical college folks. Good? Who'd I miss? School district, awesome. Other school district folk? Bartenders? Aerobics instructors? See, I always get a hand when I ask those questions, so good. So what I'd love you to do is two things. Turn to the person you're sitting next to. If you don't know who that is, introduce yourself, but more importantly, thank them for what they did this year to make education a better place for our kids. Go ahead and do that right now. Thank you for doing that. Now y'all have new best friends. Awesome. How many graduate students or undergraduate students do we have here? Excellent. Thank you for coming. Notice where they're sitting, right in the front. Great role modeling. All right, so here's what we're going to do today. Y'all have this, yeah, in your PowerPoint on your jump drive? Yes? Okay, you're not getting a break unless you talk with me up here. Do y'all have it on your jump drive? Okay, good. So here's what we're going to do together. The one most important one for me is the last one that says breathe. Really, the goal today is to do a real quick overview of what MTSS is. And does anybody know what the RTI squared means? It's response, and the sisters in the back know because they grabbed me and said, what's the little 2 mean? Response. Yeah, response to instruction and intervention, because it's not response to instruction, it's a response to good first teaching. Right, so response to instruction and intervention, and that's what it was in LA, and that's what it was in the state of California, because that's what the superintendent of instruction said, and that's what we did because it makes sense. You're going to also see flip-flop through here MTSS, which is a multi-tiered system of school supports, and which is really the umbrella under which academics and behavior fall. So some people go, oh, it's PBIS and it's RTI. No, it's really MTSS, multi-tiered system of support, under which academics and behavior fall. So what we're going to do a little bit today is just for you to, really push the envelope in terms of what you have going on in at your university colleges and technical colleges around, are you where you need to be in terms of making sure that your students and your leaders that you graduate or move out to the schools are prepared to deal with what they're facing? We're going to look at that. We're going to have courageous conversations. Because what's interesting when I was preparing for this, what I see is you have your own pyramid in your graduate classes, right? When you think about it, you've got 80% of your students that are with you are going to be with you the whole time. You're going to have about 15% of your class load, caseload is going to need an extra, what I call an extra little scoop of something, and you got about 1 to 5% that aren't going to make it unless you do something very different. So what I'd like you to think about is your own course load and your own classes as we go through this in terms of not only building in MTSS throughout, but you're dealing with your course load of students in an MTSS fashion. Does that make sense? Yes? So that's where my head goes with this. And so what we're going to do is really move fairly quickly through these topics, but really for me, it's a common language, common understanding. Y'all know that when you're working with folks, it's an orange in elementary school, it's an apple in middle school, and by the time you get to the high school, it's a truck. So what's the vertical articulation for folks that you're sending out to the field to make sure that you're all talking the common language, common understanding of what schools are needing right now? And you can see all the things up there. The impact of RTI, I'm going to share with you a little bit of data from LA, a little bit of the impact nationally, so folks know that this is not something that somebody made up. As you know, ESEA reauthorization, the foundation for that is the LEARN Act, which is all around the literacy bill, and it really is about, it flip-flops between RTI versus MTSS, but it's going to show up in the reauthorization of ESEA. So lots of work around that. And we're going to look at a blueprint. And that's all I'm going to tell you. How many of you have seen this before? We believe all kids can learn. You got most of the PowerPoint, not all of them, because I didn't want to kill you. Okay, so what I added to this with the work that I've been doing currently and around the country is this. Well, we sort of believe all kids can learn, but you know, Sharice's dad's in prison and her mom's a bartender, or you know, whatever it is. So the courageous conversation around this is, do we really believe all kids can learn? Do you believe your students in your courses can learn? Do we believe all kids in the public education? And I would tell you inexplicably the answer is no, we don't believe it. Because I can show you belief data from across the country in districts where the majority of school teachers don't necessarily believe, and I'll share you some data today where they're not really sure whether all kids can learn. And if you have an IEP, you're really not in good shape. So we've got some of that going on. But I love this cartoon. It says, "I, Mrs. Gridley, learn to read, write, and do arithmetic, and nobody will get hurt." It would be so nice if it was that easy, wouldn't it? So here's what we know is going on right now, and you could just read through these really quickly. There's a lot of things going on. The waivers are going to change the entire face of what we do. The big one is the second one that impacts all of us. It's the teacher evaluation and leader evaluations that are tied to student evaluation. You are tied 50% outcomes, 50% test scores, 50% performance, yeah? In some places, it's 60% test scores. And so that's going to have a big, big impact. So you can see all of these things up here. And then here's what we think, you know, and you could certainly add a zillion things to this. Lots of stuff rumbling in Washington, D.C. right now about higher ed, yes? Mm-hmm. And it's that value-added stuff that we just talked about. How are you knowing that what you're turning out in terms of graduates from your teacher leader preparation courses and your school psych courses are actually going to make it in the settings that we send them to? And so you can see online degrees, the freestanding colleges of education, you know, really threaten the enrollment of traditional colleges. The accountability is huge for everybody in this room right now. And it always has been, but it looks a little bit different because there's pressure coming from all points. And Common Core standards, oh my goodness. Wow. And I always say, you know, if the teachers aren't teaching the standards now, what's Common Core going to do that's different? Because a lot of the work that's going on across the country is that teachers are not necessarily always teaching what all kids should know and be able to do. And so Common Core is huge in terms of the pedagogy that teachers are going to have to use to teach. More use of informational text than ever before. So lots of shifts going on for us. Anybody want to add another one to this that I missed? Might be one or two. Bonus points for anybody who yells out an answer. Did I miss any? Anything that's burning for this group that's not up there? Political climate in this state. Yes, you have that little election coming up in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Depending on where you're driving, you can tell what county is with what person. Yes, sir.
We were talking a little bit about the challenges that teacher preparation institutions face when they go to place student teachers in classrooms where the accountability is
Yeah.
that they're kind of reluctant to have student teachers now. So how are we going to prepare high-quality student teachers
I'll repeat it.
to get them into class?
So the new wrinkle for you is how you get, people are not as willing to take student-teacher folks because of the accountability issues. So if I'm the teacher of record and my kids have to show growth, yeah, I'm not going to let a student teacher have 1 minute with that because I'm the one who's going to lose my job if I don't move. So that's a really huge issue, for that. Other things that you might, yes, ma'am? Changes in the assessment, yes. Smarter Balancer Park, which is yet to be seen, 2014, and then there's 2 consortium for EL and 2 consortium for special ed. So now we have 6 national assessments for the Common Core standards. Right? 1 set of standards, but 6 different tests. Gotta love that, right? So yeah, good point. Other ones that pop up that are in your world that comes to mind? Yes? Differentiated accountability and assessment measures for special ed teachers, because the value added in the appraisal system is going to look differently if you're a teacher that works in grades that are not tested and or you're working with special ed kids, depending on what your system looks like. Yeah, absolutely. And Wisconsin's going with Charlotte Danielson, yes? Which? Oh, okay. So I had heard Charlotte Danielson, but you're saying there's a choice. Okay. All right, so it says never ever think out of the box. But we're going to think out of the box a little bit today as a group. And I love this slide because my friend Steve Kukik said it best. It's really about survival. It's the fine art of growing no matter what the situation and or people throw at you. And so we problem solve. That's what we do as educators. We figure out how to survive and thrive at the same time. So in one of my favorite quotes is, survival. It says, I know God won't give me anything I can't handle. I just wish he didn't trust me so much. And that was from one of my heroes. And so one of the things, this is according to Judy Elliott, one of the things I look at in terms of the basic tenets of educational reform are these things right here. There's standards, right? You got your standards, Common Core, and then you've got your assessments that measure those. And then you've got what we're really talking about is really getting back into the classroom and looking at instruction with the bottom line accountability for all. And so we focus so much on standards and assessment that to me it's really about effective instruction in the instructional environment and how do we prepare our teachers to really understand how to do the instructional environment rather than quickly put kids under the microscope and say it's the kid. And so part of what I really believe in every cell in my body, we have to have reciprocal accountability, which means that we're building a system that develops capacity. So if you say, to your folks going out, go do good student teaching, go, help kids, go get race scores, and then the students are saying, yeah, we want to do this, but we really have no clue how to do it. When we put teachers and graduates into programs or into school districts that are doing some great things, they want to get on board, but unless somebody teaches them how to get on board with the initiative of the school district, how do they know what to do? So the accountability, reciprocity is huge. And I think it's coming to fruition in every part of the educational system, including our higher eds. And the former chancellor of New York really said this best, I think, when he said, the last 30 years of American public education can be characterized by a remarkable sameness approach and a remarkable flatness approach. This is a non-educator person who's really saying that we've kind of been doing the same thing for a long time. And now we're really being, the system is being shooken up a lot. I have a dream speech way back when Martin Luther King said, we've come to this hallowed spot of, the fierce urgency of America. One of the things I see in the work that I do across the country is a lack of urgency around accelerated student achievement. And a lot of times, as you know, when people are kind of flat and lack of urgency, in order to move things, people have to see the need, and they have to feel like they have the skill set to do what they're being asked to do. And without seeing the need and without feeling like they have a skill set, it's hard to move things in a sense of urgency. And so we don't have the, as he said best, we don't have the time for the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. When I hear people say, well, we're going to do this, but it's going to take us about 5 years to do it, my heart starts beating rapidly. Because our third graders only get to go through third grade once, hopefully. Right? You only get to sit in algebra once, hopefully. So the lack of, the urgency and the graduation, and that's kind of where all of this is coming from as we move toward this. So 3 cultures that really need to change. And this is from what Joel Klein really talked about. One of them is from excuse to accountability. well, this kid's on an IEP. Well, mom works a split shift. Excuse to accountability. 2 questions I want you to roll around in your head all day and for the rest of the time you're here. Are you happy with your data? Meaning what you're turning out in your courses, what you're turning out with your students, how your students are actually doing once they get into a K-12 education. So are you happy with your data? And is every classroom one that you put your own flesh and blood in? Okay, whether it's looking at your peer sitting next to you and saying, I would never put my class, my personal daughter into Judy's class because I know she's not a strong instructor at the higher ed level, whether it's at that mindset, or whether it's really saying, Judy is my new graduate of teaching, and I'm going to put her. I would never put my kid in Judy's class. So we're bifurcating kind of what we're thinking about. Does that make sense? So whether it's looking at your department buddy and saying, not going to do it, not a good teacher, not happening, or at the K-12 setting. Those are the 2 questions that should be resonating with you as we go through this. So from excuse to accountability to really looking at from compliance to performance, we are pounded so much with compliance that we just kind of forget that not everything that we have to do is not good for kids. So compliance to performance is really how do we know whether what we're doing and what we're teaching our students is really having an impact on the kids in K-12. Okay, and then from uniformity to differentiation, some of the things that we've missed in this No Child Left Behind world is which group got left behind the most? Gifted. I heard her, gifted. We have, we focused on, but how do you take your highly able kids and move them? So when we're talking about closing the achievement gap, I try not to use that, because for me it's really about all kids moving really fast, accelerated pace. So your gifted kids are getting more gifted and your lower kids are moving up. Everybody's moving. And so I know you've seen this study. Don Hernandez did this. It really talks about reading by 3rd grade, and reading by 9 is absolutely the gatekeeper for our kids. So when he did a study, he actually looked at a group of kids and looked at them in poverty and not in poverty. And he said kids that can't read by 3rd grade are 4 times more likely to drop out by 19 than a kid that doesn't know how to read. And when you add poverty to that mix, it's 13 times more likely. And so he also isolated poverty and basically said not being able to read puts the kid more at risk than a kid who's in poverty. So the reading issue is huge about making sure that our teachers are having their kids reading by 3rd grade. And so it's a phenomenal study. So in this study, he said that 88% of the kids who didn't get a diploma were those that weren't reading by 3rd grade. And Hill Walker from the University of Oregon, I think he might be retired at this point, has done studies where you can tell from right out of the womb whether kids are going to end up in prison. There's indices and indicators. And so there's a lot of stuff out there that we know. And so the sense of urgency and what I call sewing the tapestry together to make sure that we have a complete package of making sure that kids, our teachers, are ready to work with challenging situations. The Snow article that looked at a vision for action and research in middle and high school literacy. I know you've seen this, where it says a full 70% of U.S. middle school students and high school students require differentiated instruction because they're coming to you with weaknesses in literacy. And I know that, higher ed doesn't get off the hook either, right? The Chronicle of Higher Ed did an analysis that looked at 1,400 colleges and universities and showed that there's lower graduation rates. When they looked at between 2003 and 2008, a third of them, the schools that were in this study, reported a lower graduation rate. So it's everywhere, yes? Yes. Thank you. Good. So I'm just saying this, that it's not you, it's not them, it's us, right? We all have to figure out the system together to really figure it out, because we all aren't having good data right now in terms of what we're doing. So what do we know that's happening, in the country without precedent? Well, I don't know how many charter schools you have in this area, but there's room for everybody in the tent. LA, we had 164 charters. There were some awesome charters, and there were some that needed to be closed down. Just like there were some awesome public education schools and some really bad ones that we did shut down. So there's room for everybody. So that, mayoral takeovers, closing down failing schools, you can read the list up there. There's a lot of things that are happening for us. But what does it really tell us in the long run? And if you just look at the red items up there, it's really it's about results. You know, when I went to LA, you know, and again, I worked in Long Beach that had 100,000 kids. I worked in Portland that had 50,000 kids. And then I went to LA that had 650,000 kids. 1,000 school buildings, you know, when you add adult ed to it, it's like 1 million kids in that district. So at the end of the day, when I went and talk to people, people were saying, well, this is what I think. And I would say, in all due respect, I don't really, I don't want to say I don't really care, but it's, don't tell me what you think and don't tell me what you feel. Let's look at the data. Now tell me what you think and what you feel. To me, it's all about looking at data and what is the return on investment in what you're getting. So if your folks are going out, if you're teaching something and the kids aren't getting a return on investment and achievement in their classroom with their kiddos, that's not a good return on investment. When I went into LA, they were spending, and I'm just going to give you some examples as we go through them, $12 million was being spent on Read 180 and System 44. And when I asked the folks that were like the heavy lifters, phenomenal people, how are our kids doing in those programs? $12 million? Really? So it was a culture change to have people really understand, not a blame game, but what are the criteria for kids to get into an intervention? What are the criteria for kids to get out of intervention? We all talk about throwing interventions against the wall and see if they stick, but what are the multiple measures being used to put kids into interventions and programs? And so really looking at the question is the return on investment. Are you getting a bang for the buck for what you're delivering to your students and your students going into the schools? Got it? You with me? You're awfully quiet. Should I be worried? Yes, I hear a big yes up here. All right, so time for a little brain break. The word of the year is change. So a lot of what I talked about is it's really about change coming at us all the way around. So I'm going to show you a little video clip. Oh, good, she's going to stop talking.
Well, I think the questioner hit the nail on the head. As I travel around the country, people have an urgent desire for change in Washington.
We're going to have to see fundamental change.
You speak out powerfully for change.
We are united for change.
I love change.
What we need is somebody who can deliver change.
Real change, big change, bold change.
Washington has to change.
What will occur every time he speaks out for change,
Can I talk change with you?
every time I fight for change,
For 25 years, I brought change.
You are the candidate of change.
Change is a concept.
I have been an agent of change.
I embody change.
Not only can I talk change with you, I've lived it.
both of us are powerful voices for change.
Making change.
You bring about change.
Change. Change.
Change.
Change.
Change.
Change.
Change.
Change.
Change.
Change.
Changes.
And
Face.
The strange. Changes.
Don't want to be a Richard, man.
Changes.
and
Face.
The strange. Changes.
we're going to have a different
Man
time.
may change.
Me.
But I
Can't
Trace time.
time.
May change.
Me.
but I
Can't
Trace time.
Very, very clever. So here's the question for you. True or false? People resist change. Sometimes. I heard a sometimes. Do you want to expand on it? So what people, it depends on whether they perceive what you're proposing is in their best interest. I always say, so if I gave you a winning lottery ticket, Joseph, Joe or Joseph? Joe, if I gave you a winning lottery ticket, would you resist it? No. Bernie, would you resist it? Take it. So, and if I gave you a little bit of a percentage of pay increase in your paycheck, would you resist that? He says, after I pick myself off the floor. Okay, so here's the deal. This is everybody in this room. What you're facing right now is change. So when we're not talking about people outside of this room here, only when they're not doing good stuff, it's those guys, not you guys. We're talking about people in that. This is change for everybody in this room. This is huge, massive change for everybody in this room. So people, your colleagues, you resist change when you're going to experience a loss. So when you think about when NCLB came out, the resistance to NCLB was we went from private classrooms to public posting of data by subgroup, by student group. Lots of resistance to that. So now we're looking at the value added of higher education programs for teacher leader preparation and school psychology preparation, and are we getting the bang out of the buck for those teachers that are coming to us? That is a lot of pressure on you. And so it really pressures you to look at the practices that you're doing and saying, are you getting a return on investment? You know, the UC chancellor at the time when I was in Long Beach pulled together a bunch of us to say, how do we reform what we're doing in our UC systems to make sure that our kids that are going to urban education know what they're walking into. And I'm going to share with you some data that teachers say we're not prepared. We're just not prepared. And so Long Beach and the University of California at Long Beach had a seamless education system. Phenomenal program, started probably 15 years ago, nationally recognized. Amazing stuff. And how that happened was that the university said to us, you're sending us teachers that can't teach. Or that you're sending us teachers that can't read. And we said to them, you're sending us teachers that can't teach. So we married each other and got into a seamless education. So we were sending them kids that needed to be significantly remediated. They were sending us teachers and administrators that couldn't cut it in an urban education setting. And instead of throwing sticks at each other over the fence, we got together and worked it out with the UC president, the technical community college president, and the superintendent of Long Beach got together and put the system together. And really, our kids are better off for that. But that takes a lot of checking your ego at the door stuff and making sure that you're coming to the table with the right stuff. So what do we know about systems change? And that's what you're in the middle of. And you can see all of these things up here. The ability to communicate a common vision is really critical. Where are you going as a department, as a university, as a system? How do you know where you're going? One size doesn't fit all. If we were to say everybody in this room, irrespective of what university or tech college you're at, has to do the same thing, we'd get what I call malicious compliance. Great idea. And then you go get a cup of coffee and go, we're not doing that. I know this group. And, you know, PD for you as well. You're here. This is awesome that DPI puts on a summit for you, but your professional development is huge. You can't always get it by reading a book or a journal. You got to really talk to colleagues and networks and get your cups filled as well. But how do we know things in the past? Look at the first thing up there. There hasn't been a consensus. There hasn't been consensus. How do you achieve consensus to make sure that everybody's on board moving forward? And you never get 100% consensus ever. Somebody reads an article, somebody retires, you get a new person on board. So the issue is consensus is ongoing amongst your colleagues all the time. And you can look at that. School culture or the department culture is, you know, ignored. Failure to measure and analyze. We're so good at telling the teachers and the administrators and superintendents to manage and progress monitor and benchmark, but how are we in this room in higher ed progress monitoring what we're doing as a unit? So every district I work in, we got some good stuff going on in the districts that I'm working, urban districts that I'm working on around training teachers and cohorts and building around doing MTSS. And the first thing I leave with, or first thing I say and I leave with, is how are you as a team at the building level, or how are you as a central office person going to measure to know whether what you're doing to provide support is really making a difference? Because we all feel good, right? This is good, this is good. Not getting any gains. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So how are you at your level doing that? So it's a shift in thinking, right? It's a shift from going from putting the kid under the microscope, we do that too, to really looking at the interaction between curriculum and instruction and learning. And I mean, how long have we been talking about this, right? This is not new stuff. So aren't you relieved I'm not up here selling you something that's brand new that you've never heard before? I heard a little murmur of a giggle under your breath. That's good. That's encouraging. So it's really about, you know, it's about really looking at our own self and our own instructional environment in our classrooms to make sure that we're delivering it. So here's the two basic questions. I'm going to keep coming back to these. Are you happy with your data? And is every classroom and every teacher and leader that you release and school psychologist you release one that you would feel comfortable putting your own student, niece, nephew, kid? Okay, so you have your own pyramid in your classes and your courses that you're teaching. Does that make sense? You with me on that? So the pre-K, 16 vision, you can see what it is. It's really all kids at or above proficiency at an accelerated rate. I like to always show people the rate of growth of their kids. I was in a district working with a school a week or so ago in a middle school where it would take them 136 years to close the achievement gap for their black kids. Tears. They had no idea. They were growing at a negative 3.5% a year. So the message to you all is that we've got boatloads of data. We got data warehouses to knock your socks off. We admire data. We aren't analyzing and using data. So when you unpack it for folks and you have your teachers understand how to look at rate of growth data, because RTI and MTSS is rate of growth. And what we did in special education is we put kids in classrooms where we could slow down a little bit and have them get more time to learn. And what did we do? We created the Grand Canyon of skill deficits for kids. I'm a special ed person, except I taught SED kids, severely emotionally disabled kids, which was also, close your ears, the acronym for the State Education Department. Sorry. But so the same thing. So our best, I always tell people, our best RTIers in our K-12 systems are our 10th graders. So I think you guys in Wisconsin, you need 22 credits to graduate high school. Yes? So, what? Or more. Okay, in California it's 220, so it's all relative, right? So 22. So you got a 10th grade kid who's got 7 credits in 10th grade. They got 2 years to get to 22. Never going to make it. Bye-bye. See ya. They're our best RTIers. Where they are, where they need to be, how much time do they have to get there? That's what this is about. So it's really about accelerating what we're doing for kids. And you can see the rest of it. And the Every Ed system is really about gifted ed, special ed, at-risk ed. It's every ed. So as higher ed people, when you're sitting down to come up with a new initiative or you're working on a new course or whatever you're doing, I encourage you to think about putting an Every Ed system together. So if you're working with elementary teacher prep or secondary teacher prep or whatever how are we going to make sure that these folks are ready to work with differentiated, with gifted, with special ed? I've read all the mini grants that have been given out in Wisconsin. They're awesome. Congratulations. There's always more work to do. So how do you integrate special ed and general ed and gifted ed? And how do you do that at the height? Because you know what? You're modeling what you expect your folks to go out and do. And if you all are collaborating with each other, how do we expect them to go into K-12 systems and collaborate? So I know I'm probably stepping on toes, and my secretary always used to say, make sure you apologize before you start talking, because you're always going to offend somebody. But the goal is to really have you think, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? And so the future of our kids really lie in the hands of folks that are doing teacher prep programs and administrator prep programs. And so the core principles, and if you think this and you assimilate this into you, the professor that's teaching your kids, I would hope that these are your core principles as well, that you really believe all the kids in your course loads can learn to high levels. I believe this should be all of ours, whether you're in K-12 or it's the pre-K-16 vision on that. Are you with me? Okay, so more. Data is used to guide instructional decision process. This is the same stuff that we expect everybody to do. It's no different for us in higher ed. And leadership is vital. And students and families are a really, really critical part of what we're doing in this work together. So here's the ultimate outcomes. It's about good first teaching. It is about good first teaching. It's not about people saying, well, yeah, Judy, we've got RTI going on. We've got interventions. See, we're doing RTI. And I'm saying, well, how does good first teaching look? We have lost the art of good pedagogy and effective instruction. I'm a Medal and Hunter person. I was born and bred Medal and Hunter. So when I walk into a classroom, I tick it off in my head. What am I seeing? What am I not seeing? Whether you're Doug Reeves, whether you're Charlotte Danielson, whatever it is. But when you walk in, is there a common language, common understanding that we expect all kids to know and be able to do? And what are you looking at? When I walked before I left, I stepped down from my position in LA and last August. Ray Cortinas was my boss. He was 79. He's going to be 80 this month. I couldn't keep up with the man. If I wanted to see him, I had to meet with him at like 5:15, 5:30 in the morning. My first meeting started at 6 a.m. and ended at 6 p.m. It was a busy little job. So when I walk classrooms, when I was last summer walking classrooms, walking algebra and geometry classes, and the teachers were teaching and the kids were sitting. Turn around and say, okay, start your homework. No guided practice, no independent practice, no gradual release. A lot of English learners, no oral language stuff going on. And then we wonder why our kids don't have vocabulary development at the secondary levels when it was all data just dumping. Good teaching, really, this teacher knew the content, which is sometimes not the case when you're teaching algebra. They're good teachers, but they don't know the content of algebra, or vice versa. But there wasn't any academic engaged time. The kids were not engaged. So how do you all make sure that when we release these teachers out to work in these settings, that they stop and they check for understanding. So if we can do bell-to-bell instruction, check for understanding, and get lots of academic engaged time going on, you're going to see huge gains. And how does that reflect in terms of how we're prepping folks? So do we have a common language, common understanding? And I'm going to give you a couple minutes. You're going to do some table talk. So the deal is, do you have a common language, common understanding? And so National Association of State Directors of Special Ed, we put together a policy book. We put together this beautiful little definition of what response to instruction is, and it's basically matching kids' needs and accelerating learning performance. It's rate of growth over time. And how much time you have tells you how fast you need to go. Okay? And then, MTSS, it's the same thing, but I just look at the words in red is what you really need to highlight. It's an evidence-based model. I don't care if you have to stand on your head and wiggle your toes. If that makes kids learn better, use it. You don't need to have a control group. You don't need to have a methodology with it. When you're in the trenches in urban education in South Central and the teacher can say, this isn't research, but the kids respond to it, use it. Because in my mind, results set you free. You move your kids, you won't see my face in your school or on your campus. Results will set you free. So, and I know that, and I'm a researcher, I'm a data person, I worked in higher ed, I get all of that, but when you're in a situation where you're lucky that the kids make it without getting shot coming to school, the sense of urgency to make sure these kids can read and we get them motivated and coming to school is really critical. So evidence-based is really, really critical. And that there's integrated between behavior and intervention. And I know everyone in this room integrates your PBIS with your academics. Good. So it's really about an integrated approach to behavior and instruction. Varying needs of intensity, it's need-driven. And the last one is about acceleration. Have I killed that horse enough? Accelerated. So the goal is to take all of these kids, which are your students. I shouldn't call your students kids, but they're all kids. So your students in your programs on your courses, as well as our folks in pre-K-12, get them into these tiers. Think about your coursework that you use and what you do, and how do you differentiate for some of your students that need it, and get them to here. High levels of proficiency. The students and the teachers that you send out would be the ones that you put your own flesh and blood in. How do you make that happen? Does that make sense? So when we're talking about MTSS for all of the K-12s out there, that they're doing this and it's in the ESEA reauthorization, really is all of us doing it at our level as well. Ma'am, did I ask for a question? No. Go ahead, quickly.
Well, I look at this and I'm thinking that one of the fallacies that we're dealing with here at the state level is the assumption that only the quote best and brightest are the ones teaching.
I'll repeat it for you.
And therefore, any student in our program who has to take a test more than once to reach the best score, we have to report out on our website
Okay.
as a measure of the quality of our program, which means don't take anyone in who can't pass that.
Well, that's tragic if that's what you do. So she's saying that the pressure is that you are encouraged not to take, if I'm saying this right, encouraged not to take folks that need to take an entrance test more than once. If they have to take it once or twice to get in, you shouldn't take them. And so I have an issue with that. I'm not a test taker. When I applied for my doc programs, I had like 2 or 3 articles published already. I did really poorly on my GREs, like maybe under 1,000 or right around 1,000. Paid a lot of money to Kaplan to take it. I didn't get into programs. They wouldn't take me. I'd already published in refereed journals, but I'm not a test taker. But I can do a lot of other things. But even when I took the, I had to take the California teacher's test. I had a doctorate and 3 masters. I still had to sit for the teacher's test when I went to California because it's California. You got to get certified. I was a nervous wreck taking the math section because I don't do math. It's a girl thing. Did I say that? I don't do math very well, and I had to write my essays. How many of you have written an essay lately? No, it's called writing an essay. It took me, I was racing, and so I would say to you, I have a very different perspective on that. And so I think that's a courageous conversation to have with folks that are making that kind of a statement. And so yeah, you can have the cream of the crop. There's very few seats left in our systems because of budget cuts, and there's less of you to teach than there was before, so you can do the cream of the crop. You're asking me, I'm giving you a transparent answer. That's how I feel about it. So I don't know the answer to that, except that's a courageous conversation to have. around. Do we just take the people that pass first, or do we really go bigger than? You know that NCATE is looking at revamping their recertification of teachers, and so that it's not just taking a test, it's taking a test and submitting 15 minutes of video to show that you can actually performance-based. Wow, I think I would do much better with that than if I had to just take a test. So again, I mean, it reflects on, we're expecting schools to be differentiation, provide accommodations and modifications, and yet at the higher ed level we're going, well, if you have to take the test more than once, we're not going to take you. I'm sorry, there's something very wrong with that, my opinion. I'm sorry, I'm being videotaped. Can you cut that part out? That's just me. I mean, I'm a practitioner, and so I look at all this stuff and going, you cannot have a bifurcated system. We're expecting all those people down there to do this, but we're going to do this. AKA ivory tower, where did that come from? So just moving on, problem-solving process, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but y'all seen this before, yes? Please say yes loudly if you've seen this. Okay, so this is what the foundation of MTSS is. This is the foundation of what you should be doing in your work. You define the problem. You problem analyze what the problem is. You implement a plan and you evaluate it. But we're really, really good in education going from defining the problem to implementing the plan, never the twain of analyzing what the real deal is. So I use it as the example, if the kids are failing, there's a school district that 40% of their high school kids are absent 7 weeks or more, and they don't want to be held accountable for attendance. So then they wonder why their kids are not doing well on their state assessment. So would we put all those kids in intervention because they can't read? No, it's not a reading issue. It's getting their butts in the chair issue. And so how do we create an environment where kids want to come to school and they feel welcomed? And so the issue is, I always use the example of defining the problem of my brake squeak. So I've identified the problem of my brake squeak. So I'm going to problem analyze. So I validate the problem. I go to an expensive mechanic. He says, yes, ma'am, your brakes do squeak. Good. All right, and then we identify what could be contributing. Well, it could be your brake pads. It could be your rotors. And so since brake pads are cheaper, I'm going to pick brake pads. And I'm going to implement those as the intervention for my squeaky brakes. I drive around. I go fast. I go slow. I stop fast, whatever. And they stop squeaking. So my response to what I needed worked. You had to problem solve to get here on time today. You do it as a regular rule of thumb. But this is what we're talking about in terms of problem solving with our data. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is not about a new initiative. This is about integrating what we know works at every level of the system. Bottom up, top down, every way across the board. I'm going to skip some of these things. The real deal is managing the gap. Well, I'm going to go back to this one because academic engaged time in the economy of what we've got going on, academic engaged time is the #1 predictor of students' success. Better than IQ, better than ethnicity, better than socioeconomic, that one, SES. Academic engaged time is the critical thing. And you can see it. It's the currency of our instruction. You have 56,000 minutes in a year. How are you going to spend those minutes to ensure that kids are actively engaged in instruction? And then just because I want to skip through some of this stuff. How big is the gap and how much time? That's it. So when you're teaching your students and students are not getting it, if you use mastery learning and your students have to keep taking the test again, or you know that you got 2 weeks left in the semester and you got about five of your students they're not doing well. What kind of sense of urgency in terms of rate of increase of performance do you need from those kids, students? Lots, right? That's what this is all about. All right, so tiers is resources, really quickly. Tier 1, of the kids that are in your schools or in your coursework, you want at least 80% of them to be doing well in what you deliver first time through. There are going to be about 15% that are going to need that first teaching, plus what I call an extra scoop of something else. Does that make sense? Does this resonate with you? Do you have students that you're dealing with that you've got 80% that are with you and about 15% that need an additional scoop? Does this make any sense to you at your level?
It's still really present in higher ed, I think.
What do you mean it's still really present in higher ed?
My husband has been a third grade teacher for 30 years. He taught
God bless him.
He taught a college course this year, and his impression of the college student's profile was no different than his impression of his third grade.
Okay. So what she was saying is her husband has been teaching third grade for 30 years. He taught a college course this year, and the way he approached teaching that course was no different than how he approached teaching his third grade. And that's not to be anything except good instruction, good pedagogy, checking for understanding, all the stuff, Madeline, all the stuff that you know that you should do for third graders. You want to make sure that you model and do, am I right? Is that what you were sort of saying? And the learning needs of the students at higher ed. I taught, oh my God, when I taught core classes, core graduate classes, I would look at this group of people and go, you got beginning teachers, you got non-educators, and you got teachers that have been teaching for 20 years. Welcome to higher ed and teaching, you all know this. And so, holy moly. And so what you do, you teach, no, you don't teach down the middle, but you have to differentiate, right? So I hope this is making sense for you as you think through what you're doing on a regular basis. And tier 3, if you notice it's layered on tier 1 and 2. So you know that if you've got a tier 3 student in your classroom, you can't put them in something totally different or give them totally different without them practicing it on the core concepts that you want all your students to know to be able to get a pass grade in your class. Yes? Okay, so the same thing happens in higher ed, but in some places, or in K-12, some places they put kids in a totally different curricula and do not let them practice on common core standards that they should know and be able to do. And if you do that, you've just created another special education system. So your tier 3 kids are learning their skills, but they're practicing them on standards that they should know, because the goal is to get them from tier 3 to tier 2 or tier 3 to tier 1. They don't have to go through the tiers. Does that make sense? Promise? Okay, so the deal is, making sure that kids, K-12, and your students have opportunities to practice on the core standards. 2 seconds on behavior versus academics. Here's what I hear all the time. They should be inextricably linked. If you want to know how to do it, look at Florida. Florida has integrated all of their efforts and initiatives around behavior and academics. And by the way, RTI is legislated in Florida. There is no more teacher tenure, and everybody has to do it. And so it's pretty awesome. We want to be like Florida when we grow up. But I hear this all the time. Well, we can't do PBS because we got to do RTI. Well, we can't do RTI because we're in the middle of doing PBIS. And, we can't do behavior because they can't read. Well, do you think they're correlated? Is there any, Okay, so you get it. And I'm not going to go through this, but there's a zillion pieces of research out there to say that they are inextricably linked. You can't look at behavior without looking at instruction, or vice versa. Right? Think of your students that are tier 1 on academics, but they're tier 3 in behavior. They're always late to your class, they don't come, they're absent. Or think of the kids that are tier 3 on instruction, but they're in the front row all the time. Okay, and then think of the ones that keep you up at night that are tier 3 on both. They don't come, they don't get their assignments done, same thing. So lots of information that we know about it. And so I'm not going to spend time on it. There's more overlap and there's more similarities than not when we're looking at behavior. So at a higher ed situation, you want to not be necessarily teaching a class on PBS that's separated from academics. The elements, George Sugay, a good friend of mine, colleague of mine, was here last year talking about behavior. It's really important that it is MTSS under which academics and behavior fall. And we've got to make sure that people don't see them as silos. PBS is here, and teaching how to teach is over here, and learn. So you get it. So how pervasive is it? This is the national perspective, just so you all know, and you probably have seen this, is the Spectrum K-12 data, where every year they do a survey. The 2012 survey is out right now. They do about 450 school districts, and they wanted to know, how are we doing? So look at the difference between what happened in 2004 and 2007. 44% of the schools were engaged in it in 2007, 92% as of 2011. So schools, K-12 schools, are moving in the work of RTI and MTSS across the country. And you can see 90% elementary, 67% middle school. I'm a high school person. What you do with elementary around this MTSS is very, very much the same as what you do in high school. It's database decision making. Scheduling is the monster in secondary, right? But it's the same stuff. And then, 56% of the districts report having district implementation plan. You cannot do this work if you don't have a district plan. Because then you get everything in the kitchen sink thrown at you when people come in and say, okay, now we're going to do this, and now we're going to do this. No, you have to have a plan. So you can see this. But I'm sharing this with you because this is the critical importance of higher ed really integrating this stuff into what you do, because it is all over the country. And I get calls on a daily basis saying, would you come and work with us? Well, I don't want to get those calls anymore because I want them to know how to do it themselves. And then finally, this is what we know about. The number one thing that we know gets in the way of teachers and administrators doing RTI in the schools, and you can see it. It's the lack of teacher training, lack of intervention resources, and the lack of data knowledge to actually chart and graph what they're supposed to be doing with their little guys or big guys. So this is a national survey that's done every year. So I wanted to share this with you because it's really critical. This is the reauthorization we've talked about. This is the PBIS Senate bill that I know you know about, which really talks about early intervening. And now I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk at your tables. So what I'd like you to talk about is, does your department have a common language, a common understanding of the basic concepts of MTSS? Because I didn't come here today to teach about MTSS, because I'm sure you know it like at the back of your hand. This is not about teaching you. It's about having you push to think about how do you integrate yourselves as a department, as an office, as a college, as a university, around the basic understanding of MTSS. What components or concepts may or may not be universally understood, and what work needs to be done. So what did I say this morning really quickly with you that resonated, that said, you know what, we really have work to do, or you know what, we're doing really good stuff around this. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to talk at your table. Could you do that? That's an easy question. Lots of really good conversation. One of the one that resonated with me is that we send our student teachers out and the cooperative teachers have no idea what this means. Okay, so the problem solved around that is, how do you get your cooperating teachers who are getting your teachers to get savvy and up to speed with? Do you do a little seminar? Do you do a little meeting? So lots of great discussion. I appreciate that with folks around the table. The next bunch of slides you have, and we're going to go through them pretty quickly, but it's just data. I don't know if you've seen this study from Gallagher and Coleman that really talked about, you know, what do we really know about higher ed and this RTI thing? And, you know, 100% respondents indicated the importance of using RTI in teacher prep programs. General ed viewed it as a special ed initiative. And special ed viewed it as an every ed initiative. So there is the gulf right there. So, you know, it's a study that was done. So again, common language, common understanding. I don't like to use RTI. I don't like to necessarily use MTSS. I talk about a database decision-making problem-solving process. Because when you use RTI, people go, okay, we're going to take RTI, this little RTI kit off, and we're going to do RTI. And then we're going to hire RTI teachers, and then we're going to have an RTI period. In one of the districts I'm working on, they tagged on 30 minutes at the end of the day and said, okay, we're doing RTI. But what are you doing in those 30 minutes? So the culture shift around from me and to tell you is I really hesitate to call it, because we have a lot of it's in education. So it's a database decision-making model. The foundation rests upon problem-solving process. Okay, so you have this. This was an amazing study that was done in Florida that looked at first-year teachers and teachers up to 4 years of teaching practice, that really looked at a bunch of questions and surveys about how they felt if they were prepared to do this MTSS stuff, which you know Florida statewide is doing. And so really quickly, you can see this. 40% of the teachers surveyed did not believe all kids can learn. 55% use data to determine effectiveness versus teacher judgment. That means half, 45% of the teachers are saying, seems good, let's do it, versus using data. You can see the rest of them. Two-thirds reported some need of support. 40% needed substantial support to figure out gap analysis, where they are, where they need to be, how do you get them there. So there's a bunch of pie graphs, teacher beliefs. Students with high incidence are capable of achieving academic benchmarks. You can see that, which is a little problematic since most of the kids that are in our schools are resource room kids, LD kids, not necessarily the cognitive kids. You understand what I'm saying? So a lot of the kids that are on IEPs are in the mainstream classrooms altogether. So if we have a lot of teachers that are not believing that, we got some issues there. Using data to determine interventions are better than teacher judgment. That we kind of sort of did that one. 55% agree. Level of, am I going too fast? Yes? You have these on your jump drive. So level of support needed to use data to make decisions about individual groups. There's some level of support, 56% of the or 66% they needed some level, and 25% of the teachers that are first in 1 to 4 years of teaching needed substantial support. Support needed to use data to make decisions for individual and groups. This is where you differentiate. This is where you put your kids in groups. This is what they said. 78% of our new baby teachers needed some support. Substantial support, 33%. Use data to define current level of academic performance. The first year teachers, more than 50%, 58% of those new year teachers, first year teachers, needed substantial support to define current level of academics. Pause. Level of support needed to use gap data to determine whether core instruction should be adjusted. 40% said they needed substantial help looking at their data to figure out what they should do to adjust instruction for kids. I just go back to when I was in my undergrad and I was, special education, primary, special education certification with a secondary and elementary ed, and I always kept saying in my special ed courses, when do we get to learn how to teach reading? When do we get to learn how to teach science? I never got that. And then when I got a boatload of kids who couldn't read, it was like, well, I never got to know how to teach reading. So when I started taking my master's level courses, not in special ed, more in educational psychology, I started taking reading classes so I could be a better teacher. So it just kind of, it resonates with me to say, what are we setting our folks out to? Level of support needed when it comes to selecting data for progress monitoring. So you can see these. I'm not, there's just a few more. Percent of teachers who have skills to interpret graph data. 30% of our teachers are saying our new teachers don't have the skills. That's a lot of teachers. Because a lot of times your districts that folks work in give their stuff in tables and charts, and they're having trouble. So the perceptions of skills that for the 6 areas, 3 behavior and 3 academic, 60 to 75% of beginning teachers reported needing some level of support for accessing resources to develop evidence-based academic behavior interventions. Right, they're program dependent. They have trouble figuring out how to differentiate kids based on pedagogy. Less than half of the beginning teachers reported being able to collect universal screening data. So again, sharing this with you because this was a survey that was done by teachers, first-year teachers up to 4 years of teaching, that are saying that here's what we really need higher ed to really tweak to help us be better teachers. So this says the feds have authorized me to leave your child behind. Okay, so what does this mean for us in higher ed? What does this have to do with this group? What does this mean? What does this mean for teacher leader prep programs? What's your greatest questions, challenge, or concern about what we just spent some time reflecting on? What's your greatest question? Yeah, go ahead. Right. Wish we had a microphone. Yeah, so if 3 to 5 years of teaching, if it takes 3 to 5 years for teachers to get pretty solid in their craft, how do we ensure that those data reflect what teachers need? And so as you know, when you're teaching in schools and you have kids going up the pyramid, time and intensity increases as you go up the pyramid. So by the time you get to tier 3, your focus on your curriculum is very narrow. You're only teaching the skills that those kids need to survive in the next grade level. You're not teaching every standard and every course and concept that you need. You're really narrowing the focus and really getting skill. So really, again, to your point, it really says we need to reflect on what we need to do differently. Sir?
I think from a local school district's point of view, the majority of hires that we make are general ed teachers. So we need general ed teachers coming out of the training institutions to be able, and comfortable with owning Tier 1 and Tier 2, whether we are talking about academics or behavior.
And I would also add owning Tier 3 for when those kids are, moved back into classrooms, because you got to see kids, not tiers, because I'm a Tier 3 adult, if you haven't noticed. So if you see me as a Tier 3 adult versus what my needs and skills are, I'm not going to be in good shape. So we do that to kids. So teachers have to also be able to look at and understand Tier 1 through 3. Tier 2 is extra scoop. When I was working in a school district, not my last one, teachers union said, we have a work, and we have a labor issue. You're asking teachers to differentiate. So how do we make it, because people, it's a skill and a need. They needed to be taught better how to differentiate their classrooms. And so there was an issue with the union because we were asking teachers to differentiate instruction in their classrooms. And so how do you better prepare folks to come and do the Tier 1 and the extra scoop at Tier 2? Excellent. What are some other questions, concerns? Yeah? Ay, can I have an amen on that? Oh, come on. Cross-pollination of College of Educations, right? So cross-pollination, that you're all talking to each other. You may not like each other, but you got to work together. Okay, so check the ego at the door and keep focused on what your goal is, and that is to turn out the best and brightest teachers into the field of education to make sure that all of our kids have equitable access to jobs and college and whatever they want to do. It's an equity and access. To me, it's a civil right, and I believe that because it's an equity and access for our kids who, if they don't learn how to read, write, and do arithmetic, they will never make it. And I happen to be one of those examples, that if I didn't have a good education and didn't have mentors along my, I wouldn't be standing here today. So I may not present the trials and tribulations of growing up, but I'm one of those kids that grew up that if I didn't have somebody pushing me and a higher education teacher, prep professor saying, come with me, you have something very special and we need to hone that. That's the kind of stuff that we need to do, and we need to build that through the system, higher ed all the way down. So everybody needs to be working together. It starts absolutely with cross-pollination, so I appreciate that comment. Other comments, questions, or challenges? Punctuate that, please. Okay. Mm-hmm. Who's got the microphone? Oh, yeah, that's what across everybody. So he's in school psych and communications disorder and special ed and general ed and leadership and administration. Everybody needs to be talking about it. And we're not going to have time to unpack that article that's in press. You have an article that I gave you from Loyola, from David Prosty, in press, where they actually did exactly what you just said. They cross-pollinated. So if you get a chance, you can eyeball that. And they started within their teacher prep, higher ed folks. And it really, people, this is not a special ed initiative. And if it is, it's the kiss of death. Because in every place I've worked, and I'm a sheep in wolf's clothing, I'm a special ed person, but I happen to be the chief academic officer in LA. And so special ed has tried to move this in the districts that I've worked in, it has fallen flat. It moved in Long Beach because my fingerprints were on it, but they didn't know it was coming out of my office. The deputy of instruction moved it. Because if people see it as a special ed initiative, they go, oh my God, here's special ed again. The dog that everybody likes to kick. Okay? So move it. It's got to be moved with general education. Because special education has got incredible skill sets to bring to the table. But we also have a reputation. Right? And so the deal is that it's got to be in every ed initiative. Everybody has to own it. Everybody has to own it. So the cross-pollination is huge. And I am a special educator, so I get to say that stuff. So any other questions, challenges, or concerns? Easy group, no issues. Love it. All right, so, we know what to do, but how come it isn't happening? Is the question. So what are some specific skills for administrators and teachers? And again, these are the things that when you sit down and talk to people that they will tell you in order for teachers and leaders to survive in an MTSS system, you can read these. Demanders of data, not admirers of data, demanders of data and using data. And so you can see these. We're not going to spend any time going through there. Users of data to inform the development and evaluation of interventions. Ability to evaluate core instruction. When kids aren't failing, it's not about the kid, it's about the instructional environment and the interaction of what I do for my teaching and what I use for my curriculum and how I deliver my pedagogy. If that ain't working, it's me. When I taught higher ed courses, at the end of every lecture I did, I gave a 2-minute paper or some sort of evaluation so I could say, I'd be driving home going, knocked that one out of the park. That was the best lecture I ever gave. I'd go home and I'd read my 2-minute papers. What did you learn, relearn, rediscovered as the night of tonight's lecture? What do you still need clarification? I'd go home and go, what the hell? Were they in the not in my class tonight? It was the best lecture I ever delivered. I lost half the class. They had no idea what I was talking about. But I did that at higher ed to be able to go back and say, you know what, it's me that didn't do a good delivery of instruction and standard objective for my class. And again, I appreciate that. I didn't teach my graduate and undergraduate students any different than I did when I was teaching in high school and middle school. But I always evaluated my own teaching. So instead of putting them going, well, they obviously stayed at the pub too late last night, I looked at my own teaching. And so other specific skill sets, and you can, not that you would ever do that, students sitting in the front. Ability to evaluate positive, poor, and questionable response to instruction. How do you know on a trajectory whether kids are moving in the direction, sort of moving in the direction, not moving in the direction? And then what do you do about it? These are skills that our teachers and administrators need to know how to do. You can see that. Ability to listen and question and paraphrase and summarize. So I'm going to turn to your neighbor, elbow partner. And if you're a table of 3, go for it. What kinds of teachers and administrators do you think pre-K-12 school systems need right now? What do we need? What do we think they need? What do they need? You got about 2 minutes to do this. Go for it. So what are some, we're going to process this via chaotic shouting. What are some of the things that you feel that teachers and administrators need to work in pre-K-12 systems from your perch, from your perspective? Yes, sir. Okay, administrators that are instructional leaders, not managers. Amen. What else do we need? You're not getting a break. Yeah.
I think building administrators also, especially those that are solo in a given building, they need support when they have to deal with emergencies or discipline. If that's all they do all day, they manage from 4 p.m. on because they can't do anything else because they've been tagged as their job. So how do you lead when you're putting out fires all day?
Okay, so that would mean that what we teach and train those folks to do is going to look differently, knowing that that's what they face when they go into schools. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I think we have to have both teachers and administrators who can take this massive data that comes out and know how to analyze it.
Yes. Yes. Consumers of data, users of data can break it down in layperson's terms. Excellent. Other things that you talked about in terms of what folks need. Really? Yeah.
We talked about some aspects of things and the importance of people being willing to collaborate and be flexible, thinking and learning, and learn from each other to really have the student focus first.
Great.
Stuck with a model or their past experiences.
So students at the middle of what they're doing always. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, you talked a little bit about one of the concerns being that sometimes you feel like you're being asked to send a master teacher out of college to plug in right away. When you're trying to send someone that's ready to be a master teacher out there. Yeah. So that leads you to look at the entry-level skills that are being asked of us to prepare before. So I guess I would say sending the teacher out there with skills and dispositions to be adaptable and flexible.
Absolutely.
Enter into any kind of system and then figure out what they're asking you to do and be able to do that.
Well said. I mean, absolutely. And here's a list. And you hit some of these. But, you know, absolutely, you'll see in the next 2 slides, you're going to hit a bunch of what's up there. It's not just about your content, but how do you survive in the system that you're being put into. So you can see all the ones that are up there, believing that special ed is the last stop, not the first stop. Applied behavior analysis, catching kids being first. These are all the things that are just rudimentary, but what folks really are saying, what our folks need when they come to the table. Have good interpersonal relationship skills. Liking children is always a good start. You know, fire in the belly for kids. Fire in the belly for kids, being able to challenge authority in professional ways, rely on research and evidence-based practices, not afraid of taking risks, okay? Know and understand in culturally relevant ways, right? Cultural diversity, making sure that the pedagogy and courageous conversations around making sure that kids get the culturally relevant stuff and English language learner stuff and standard English learner stuff. And you can see, being able to teach in a second language, or being able to teach students that are learning a second language. Having skills to engage students and families in instructional intervention. That's a huge bunch of stuff for higher ed to be thinking about. So what's the role in all of this is really to look at how do you revise, update, integrate what you're doing in the higher ed level. And I know you know this because this is what you know what you're sending your folks to. Revise ed leadership programs to make sure that they reflect what we heard about what the principals are going. We know what folks are, they're going to war every day. In the school districts I work with that are dysfunctional or having issues at the central office, I say to them, while you guys are trying to figure this out, kids are showing up at the school site every day. And so we know what we're dealing with when we're talking about what we send our teachers and our school psych folks to. So how to start a movement. So part of what we're doing, and this is tricky stuff, right? There's a lot of dynamics that goes into moving, people's vision and understanding to get out of the comfort zone and, get out of silos and really talk about cross-pollination. So how do you start a movement irrespective of what your situation is, what your position is, what you're doing? So how do you start that movement? I'm going to show you a really quick video how to do that.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and the crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So, notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So, over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that at TED. Thanks.
All right, so before we go to that, I just wanted to kind of set it up for you. And in your PowerPoint, there's all sorts of data around LA, and I'm not going to spend any time doing it. We're going to skip a whole boatload of stuff. But I guess I would show you these two real quick slides about big picture results. In LA, last year showed growth in every area, every content level, and every grade level. We've been doing RTI for a couple of years, 2 years or so. And you know, when you're at the bottom, it's easy to show growth. So the state made 10 points growth, LA made 19 points growth, which is pretty huge. But I guess what I would point out to you, if you look at the bottom up here, 15 points for African Americans in 11, but in 10 we had a 21-point growth. So in 2 years, and the Academic Performance Index in California, we had a 36-point growth for our African American kids. Same thing with students with disability, 48-point growth in 2 years on our academic state assessment. And then English language learners, 20 points last year and 11 points the year before. And y'all know that that is the hardest group to move because the pot is never the same. Kids redesignated and get English proficient, and then new kids come in. And so the point being is we taught our teachers and administrators how to use data, how to really go after, you know, graphing and charting and looking at, bless you, return on investment. So I just want to share this with you, that there is return on investment when you send folks out. I also want to be super reflective of the fact that, you know, it's overwhelming right now for any one of us to be in education, because I know some of you are saying, and at the break I chatted with a couple of you saying, you know, how do you expect us to possibly have every student we release into a K-12 education be prepared to work? We can't. We just can't. Okay, so think of the teachers and the administrators that have kids coming to them on a daily basis, and they have to deal with kids that... So it's hard. This is really messy, hard, courageous conversation work, but you know, we've got to look at how we can do things differently, because as Rahm Emanuel said to me when I was talking to him about Chicago, he said, we are sending our folks into war. And I thought, you know, and he said a couple other colorful things, but the point being is that, you know, it resonated with me, because in many sense, if you're in urban America, or rural America, by the way, we are sending our folks, you know, 54 kids in an algebra class in LA. You know, AP classes that, you know, you have to walk sideways to get down the physics labs because there's so many kids in there, and yet there's teaching and learning going on. So if we really have to really work together. And, you know, it's a U.S. education. I get all of that. But I'm pleading with you as here's the folks that really are helping, making sure that our babies and our K-12 folks graduate that are, you know, able to give back, that we really have to do cross-pollination in our higher ed programs. If principals don't know how to lead, they didn't get it from somewhere. If teachers don't know how to teach, they didn't get it from somewhere. And it's not a blame game. It's just, it's time for us to relook at what we do. And can we possibly prepare everybody for everything? Probably not, but we can take a damn good run at it. And so I would say, you know, where you're sending your folks and what their data shows in the districts that you're sending your folks to, if you know those cooperating teachers are not prepared to do really good supervision of your teachers, maybe you don't put them there, or maybe you figure out how to do a mini course for those cooperating. I don't know the answer to that. But I sure would put everybody in a room, lock the door, and problem solve it. Get your superintendents and get your folks on board and have a seamless conversation, K-16, about how we get better at making sure that our teachers are successful, given the TPA and whatnot. I just felt the need to say that because I don't want you to think I'm a Pollyanna sitting up here not understanding what the real deal is with what you're working with. There are silos of huge dimensions in higher ed. There are silos of huge dimension in K-12. And you may not like people, you may not believe in the research strand that people are doing. I get all of that. But can you put your head can you put your head on your pillow at night and know you did the best thing for kids? Kids, your students, kids, K-12. And so that's where this is coming from. It's the fire in the belly to make sure that we don't admire the problem that we're in the toilet in education in this country and it's political, but we actually do something about it. And I will go to my grave saying the same thing. It is hard work, boys and girls and men, and men and women. It is hard work. It's the hardest work you'll ever do. But it really is about making sure that all of our kids have equitable access to what they should get. So I just wanted to appreciate some of the, you know, the tension and the frustration, and I get it. But I can't be second in command in the second largest district in the country at one point and say, you know what, I guess we'll take mediocre teachers and hope that they survive their first or second year. And I do believe that we got gains in what we did is because we put all of our school buildings through 2 years of PD training, 5 days each year. Cohort training where we taught them knee to knee how to use data. All the stuff that you heard that what we're missing, we actually went in and taught our folks how to do it. So it is possible. But that's why you do what you do, because it really is about reaching that goal for all kids. So let's talk a little bit about the higher ed blueprint. Just a little bit of history. You know that NASD, National Association of School Districts or Special Ed Directors of Education, we put together 3 blueprints, and you already probably know them, but I'm just going to tell you the etiology. The district level I led, gosh, I don't even know when we did this, but the nice thing about a blueprint is it is a blueprint. It tells you where to put the bearing walls. It doesn't tell you what color to put what to put on the wall. So it tells you, which you'll see in the higher ed one, what are the absolute elements that you need to be looking at to make sure that you pull this off with success. There's no one way, right way to do it, but there are bearing walls that you need to have in place. There's also one that David Tilley led at the school building level, where if you're at a school site, it is an awesome blueprint for you to figure out how to do this stuff at a school site level. Okay? And then George Batch and David Tilley and I wrote one for the state level, which came out and is on the website, and each one of these has a self-assessment that goes with them. So if you're leading this at the state, here's the way that you would lead MTSS or RTI across the state. So there's 3, and the one that was missing was the one for higher ed. And so the one for higher ed doesn't have a fancy cover on it because NASD is not publishing it per se, but David Prossi at the University of Loyola, Chicago, led this work with Diane Morrison, and every year for 15 years we've had this conference called Innovations, which is for doers by doers. Nobody gets paid. It's, you know, no vendors are there. It's like we cut it off at 700 people. It's been going on for 15 years. We've been doing this for 15 years, but we never had something in place for higher ed. So for the last 3 years, David pulled a group of higher ed folks together, created its own strand, and wrestled through this to come up with this, this document. And you can see as you look at the document, all the people from higher ed. Janet Graydon was on it, Reshley, lots of people from across the country at higher ed. And people at K-12s also were on it to just kind of review it, to really put together a blueprint, if you will, that really would help folks like yourself at higher ed institutions figure out how to infiltrate and integrate MTSS, the elements of database decision making, into your courses. And so I'm not going to do these. These are just stuff that you can look at on your own. The $1 million question is, you know, how does higher ed maintain its academic freedom and open research agenda while responsibly ensuring teacher and leader candidates in the profession with skills that enable them to be successful, especially under the new TPA in Wisconsin? And so the academic freedom thing is always a big deal. But, you know, we may be working hard on stuff, but are we working hard on the right stuff? And so the question is, how are we using data to really drive our research agendas and the work that we do? So the structure with this is really not about adding an RTI course to special ed or adding an RTI course to general ed or leadership. It's really about how do we integrate it into the fabric of the courses that we teach, okay? And so you can see that. It's not an add-on. Make it a part of your clinicals or your projects that teachers do and administrators do. How do you integrate it? Because if you teach it as a separate course, it's an it. There it is. We're going to take it off the shelf. Here it is. And if special ed is doing it and general ed is not, guess what kind of initiative it is? Okay, and if we know that less than 5% of the kids that get put on IEPs ever get out of special ed, what's so special about special ed? Right, you look at your data, you know, once kids are in, they're lifers. And you also know that there's a lot of kids that have dysteachia, not dyslexia. Okay, so you get all of that. So really it needs to be driven by general ed folks and administrator and leadership folks. It really needs to be there. So the questions, and you have these, and I apologize for folks who have access to this stuff, but you know, these are questions that I put together that you ask yourself, you as a collective plural in your departments, that you ask yourself about how do your programs prepare candidates for the 3-tier problem-solving process? It'd be really cool to model it and show them how this is, you know. How do you prepare for folks that really understand universal screening and problem identification? It's all the stuff that we've done through the survey that Florida did and Spectrum K-12. We got more data to know what our teachers and leaders need. How are we addressing that? How do you prepare candidates to implement scientifically researched reading and math, evidence-based curriculum? How are we doing this? And then you can see these. Progress monitoring, data collection. How and where in your programs and your coursework do they get it? Is it a theory course? Is it or is it across, we've all agreed on a common language, common understanding for MTSS in our courses, and we're all going to teach these elements of MTSS in our courses. Seems pretty straightforward to me. That is a huge lift in higher ed for lots of reasons that you know better than I do. There has to be the collaboration. And again, I always go back to when they did the Title I conferences decades ago, and the assistant secretaries were all on the stage at the federal level saying, and we've now started working together as an agency. You had Jerry Tarazi up there, you had Margaret Spellings, you had all of these, and I knew that, we all knew that they weren't working together, but they were trying to model what they expected all the school districts to do. So anyway, let me just tell you really quick, here's what's going on in Florida. Florida has, this is what their administrators, if you graduate from a university, graduate students at a university, in order to get an administrative certification, you have to meet these requirements to get a degree as a superintendent, as an administrator. These are the basis of what principals are evaluated. The thing that they've got going on in Florida is whatever you do to get out of higher education, principal evaluation, teacher evaluation, competencies that you do in higher ed is the same system that's used to evaluate you in K-12. How awesome is that? So there's not one for higher ed and one, it is the same system. So the US, their department said, their DOE said, these are the practices that you must pass and show performance of. This is how you're, same thing when you get into your positions. So you can see the domains and the practices. They also have what's called the FEEPs. Isn't that cute? This is where the teachers are really, and now they've got it, school psychologists, speech pathologists, everybody. You can run, but you cannot hide in Florida. Everybody is on, and there's no more tenure, right? You know that. They got rid of tenure. But you have to, 50% of your evaluation, no matter what your position is based on performance, and 50% is on outcomes. So if you're meeting as a school psychologist and you're running groups as a counselor and you're not able to show that what you're doing is improving student achievement, stop it. Or you're going to get marked on your evaluation performance. It's pretty tricky. So everybody, there's room for everybody. Teachers, speech paths, communication people are all under these. And the thing in what it is whatever you do in pre-service, you're held accountable in in-service. Wouldn't that be cool to be able to partner up with your schools to do that? And so you have these. So this is the link between the appraisal system of what happens, portfolios, whatever you do to graduate with high levels of credentials out of your higher ed programs, same thing that's being measured in their schools. And so this is what the 6 practices are for teachers. So quality instruction and continuous improvement directly linked to what they're doing in MTSS in the state of Florida. So they've really taken it by the horns and basically said, higher ed is inextricably linked to K-12. We're holding each other accountable. There is no more tenure. So if you give us teachers that don't make it, we know exactly what university and what program they came out of. We will have a need discussion. So high stakes, pretty high stakes. And this is being rolled out. There's a new principal and administrator evaluation that's being rolled out July 1 this year. Ready, go, it starts. And it's if you want to watch a state that really has done some pretty aggressive reforms, no holds barred, take no prisoners, I would look at that state. But I think it's cool for you to see that there is a place that really took higher ed and linked it to K-12. These are blogs for you coming soon. It's really here, the blueprint for integrating for higher ed. So let's just, what I want to share with you is how we did this. And there's a couple things in there. I gave you the article that really outlined what David Prossi and his crew did at Loyola to actually integrate across their teacher prep and administrator prep programs to advocate for these domains. Lots of people reviewed this document. Prossi has been meeting with NCATE, and the teacher accreditation is at ACCTE. Lots of people at that level, they have all embraced this approach, by the way. Folks at the top in Washington and where those organizations are, he has been meeting for the last 2 years with them to really talk about what this should look like and how this should help guide some of the accreditation programs across the country. And so there are 7 domains, as you can see. Okay, and so what this was built is for folks like you to sit down and look at these domains and see what the indicators are of what would happen. So for each domain, there is a competency, which you will see, and for each competency, there's a set of indicators. Okay? So if you were to pull up this document, Let me just get out of this for a second. Where'd it go? So if we pull this up, lots of people, there's a really great introduction to this. Pretty awesome document. So for each competency, know and use the model of a multi-tiered system of support. There's a list of indicators that would say whether or not you've got this present in your coursework. So this one happens to be under the multi-tiered system. When you move to the next domain of decision making, you following me on this, folks? You've got an assessment competency, and there it is written there. Students will administer and score appropriate assessments for the purpose of informing effective instruction. That is a huge competency that we want our folks to know and be able to do. Here are the list of indices that you would think about making sure that your teacher, prep, and administrator folks, leadership folks, make sure that those are competencies or indicators that would be woven into your courses at higher ed. So what this document does is really lays out for folks what are the things that you really need to think about, making sure that you have a well-rounded, integrated approach to delivering MTSS. Problem-solving process. The competency is, apologize for that, be able to apply a problem-solving process and develop, implement, and evaluate effective instructional practices for academic and behavior domains. There is a set of indicators. And what you will see in here is that it's not segregated into PBIS and academics. It's data, data, data. How do you use it? What does it reflect in behavior? What does it reflect in academics? So there are 6 domains. There are also, there's also what you have in there as well is I gave you a self-assessment that looks like this. So I need you to pull that one up as well. So what you have in front of you is a self-assessment where you as a table, what I'd like you to do is to take a couple minutes. There's 7 domains. What I'd like you to do is just pick 1 domain or 2 domains and just mess around with it. What you have is what I've done in terms of setting this self-assessment out is for you to look at this. There's a rating scale. We just made it up. 0 means there's no evidence. 1 is there's some evidence. 2, there's completely full implementation in place. And what you see is what I did was you can see that there is the domain is the multi-tiered system. Here's the competency, knowledge and use of the multi-tiered system of support, and here are the indices down the side. And what you do is you rate yourself as a group, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, where are you? And then what would be the actions that you would take on to make this happen if you think this is something that's really an area that really needs to be boosted in your cross-pollination? Is spend some time with the self-assessment as a group, as a team. If you can't get access to it, just get close to somebody and nuzzle up there. Review the domains and competencies and indicators. There's 7 domains. There's competencies under each domain. Each domain has an indicator. Which ones are present in your teacher leader or supervision or not teacher leader, teacher leader administrative leadership programs? Okay, which ones are absent and what are some next steps that you would take to continue the effort to align pre-K 16? So what I'd love you to do is to take 10 or 15 minutes at this time as a group, maybe pick just 1 domain and do a quick self-assessment. Most of you are sitting with teammates, yes? For the most part. So what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to pick a domain, and then what are you going to do? Talk about your programs. Is it missing? Is it not missing? And I understand that you're going to take a little bit more time to get friendly with it, but I would like you to just mess around with the document a little bit. So go ahead and do that, and I'll be coming around. So just really briefly in the few minutes we have left, just just report out. What did you relearn, rediscover, kind of talk about, the heavy lifts, just talk. You're the first group, by the way, in the entire country that has done this with this document. So yeah, it's a big deal. You may not feel like it's a big deal. This has been in the making, and it's been in draft, and it's been worked through with a lot of higher ed folks, but you're the first person. I'm the one that did the self-assessment, which is not a big deal, but I put it together to have it for you as a tool today. With permission all the way around to do this. I was a part of the review team anyway, but really to give you a chance to really, I didn't want to come in and say, yeah, you ought to be doing this and not give you a tool to actually go back and look at doing it. So you are the first group that has looked at a self-assessment, that has actually had time to wrestle with as a team the document. So I'd love to just get some feedback, if it's not personal, just overall, just quick Is it helpful?
Generates a lot of good discussion.
Generates a lot of good discussion. Other comments on it? Yeah.
The application for K-12 is parallel, absolutely. So when you talk about the Florida model.
Okay. So he's saying that it's parallel to, it's absolutely relevant and parallel to what should be going on in K-12, so it kind of harkens the Florida model where what's good in higher ed is good for K-12 type of stuff and vice versa. So I appreciate that. Other comments? Very detailed. Yeah, very detailed, yeah. Lots of, and there might even be overlap in there. Yeah, so very, very detailed. And if you look through who the reviewers were and the people that put together, you'll get it. Other comments? Yeah.
There's a good deal of overlap with our knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we have with our Penn Wisconsin teaching team. So I would say one of our tasks would be to find the gaps.
Perfect. Great. It really is a nice way to kind of round out and fill gaps. Perfect. Yes, ma'am. So she's saying that she's seeing more that the general ed teacher prep programs need to have a little bit more of the special ed type, which I would say learning how to use data is not necessarily, but we know how to do that really. Yeah, so having a little bit more cross-pollination and overlap. Yeah. Yes. And, so special ed being a little bit more clinical, and the fact that your entire state is moving to SLD identification using this methodology in 1 year or so, there's an urgency. School psych programs, big deal. It's a whole other way of working. Oh, I'm so sorry, SLD, that's what we do in education. Good. Specific learning disability. So in order to get a kid with specific learning disability, have somebody qualify for services, my understanding is that you're moving to the multi-tiered approach. Is that right, John? Multi-tiered approach to have kids be eligible to be put on IEP, so even more heightened urgency around teachers understanding it. Because it's not about, dumping kids into an intervention and seeing if, it really is a whole other way of assessing. And in California, we haven't used a discrepancy model for decades. And so when we did this model in Long Beach for a long time, we had 7% of our kids on IEPs. So it's possible. Other comments around it? Is it a tool that you can take back home and use, and is it useful a little bit to have some dialogue with? Are you mad at me? Huh? All right, so I'm moving on because I'm the only thing that stands between you and your lunch. So if you're going to achieve excellence in big things, you develop the habits in little matters. Excellent is not an exception, it's a prevailing attitude. So I want to applaud you and recognize you for all of the work that you have done so far for all of our teachers that are teaching in our K-12 schools. Change is hard and change is messy. So, the purpose of the talk today was really kind of, not admire the problem, but just push our thinking about what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If we're asking our folks in K-12, pre-K-12 to do it, we ought to be modeling it and doing it, right, at higher ed. And you probably are doing, for the most part. The purpose of the document is to help you round out or fill in the gaps. And the fact that you've got TPA coming, you've got the SLD, specific learning disability criteria is changing. The state of Wisconsin, and besides you've got that little election coming up, you've got a lot of stuff going on here. And so, when you have the Rama manuals in your mind going, we're sending our folks to war, you look at preparing, and having worked in South Central where many of our schools look like prisons because they're surrounded by barbed wire and the safest time to go is in the morning because that's when everybody's sleeping, you look at this with a different sense of urgency. And so my world and my lens of looking at this is about survival. And I may be a Caucasian, but I grew up in a different world than most of us did. And so for me, the sense of urgency of having equity and access for all kids to robust instruction, K-16, is absolutely, it's critical. It's life-saving in many of our places. So really huge. We tell this to K-12 people all the time, just say no to silos. You cannot achieve this work if you're working in departmental silos. Or even if you're in one department and you're all teaching your own coursework. Somebody's doing the behavior, somebody's doing the theory, somebody, whatever. You get what I'm saying. You can't do it if you're working in silos. And if it's like I go back to the assistant secretaries all sitting on the stage saying, and now look at, we're all on the same stage collaborating together. Really? So what we really have to model what we're expecting. And then just remember that this work, a cord is much stronger than individual strands. I mean, the sense of frustration is you expect us to change what we're doing to get teachers prepared to go into that? Yes, I do. And so, but that is change. It's gut-wrenching. It's giving up things that you've done comfortably. I mean, when you go into you know the cooperating teachers that teach the frog lesson because that's what they've been doing for 25 years, and they're good at it, and it takes 15 weeks, and there's nothing on there that's assessed by the wiki, WKCE, wiki. But they're good at it, and so they teach it. So it's really about how do we create the standards that we know that we've got for higher ed teaching and learning, and we use all of that for our certification. So I'm going to leave you with a video that I thought was a kind of a cool way to pull it together in terms of high expectations. High expectations and really having more faith in the system than we think, and really creating a seamless collaborative energy and effort around doing this work together. Okay? Oops, there we go.
Talking about expectations. Watch. What's interesting to me about that is, regardless of where I am, anywhere, every audience gets that. But it doesn't matter, you know, that's just, you know, the pentatonic scale for some reason.
If you're looking for a job in neuroscience, I think...
The message today is really that anywhere we put our students, our principals, our leaders, our administrators, we want them to be able to go anywhere and be able to replicate and collaborate and do great stuff, according to what you just saw. So I want to thank you very much for your time and all the hard work you do for our kids and our students and our graduate students and our principals. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and have an amazing lunch.